Have you ever felt the weight of grief so strong that it seemed to shape the very world around you? Mary was no stranger to this. After losing her sister, she wandered through life feeling like a ghost in her own story, until one fateful night, a haunting melody led her to a forgotten street, where the lines between memory and reality began to blur. What she discovered there would change her forever. But was it a blessing or a curse? Stay with me as we unravel Mary's chilling journey through loss, mystery, and hope.
My sister died, and Mary's heart was broken. She felt lost in the huge United States. The wide streets, constant hum of cars, and constant blur of people moving around her made her feel even more alone. She hid herself in books and worked to feel better during the routine of college life. But the empty space stayed. The sound of her sister laughing used to make her happy, but now it was like a haunting tune that made her think of what she had lost. Mary often found herself lost in the city at night, looking for something she couldn't put her finger on. In the late evening, the streets were less busy, and the dim light from the lamps cast long shadow. The odd horn, the rustling of leaves, and the hum of a passing car were sounds of life that were far away and made her feel like she was in a world she didn't belong in anymore. After going to a college event one cool fall night, Mary realized she had stayed too long. The last bus going home had already left, so she was on her own in the cold, empty streets. She let out a sigh and put her hands deep into the pockets of her coat. She chose to cut short her trip by going through a street with few people and old, worn-out houses. As she walked, a light mist started to form over the pavement, making it hard to hear her steps. A soft tune came toward her as she walked. She stopped moving, and her breath got stuck in her throat. The tune was clear. It was the ballad her sister used to sing, a song that had both comforted her and shown how close they were. The sound was soft but clear, like it came straight to her ears on the wind. She looked around and saw that the street was empty. No one could be seen. But the music kept going, like a ghostly thread through the night air. Mary couldn't help but follow the sound, even though she was scared and wanted something. The tune took her down a strange lane with faded graffiti on the walls and out onto a quiet, empty street. An old, small house with boarded-up windows and paint that was coming off stood at the end of the street. It looked like it had been forgotten, but it had an energy that Mary couldn't explain. The melody was getting louder and could be heard inside the house. The door was a little open, so it creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick and heavy, and it felt so still that it was almost suffocating. The dim light from the street barely made it into the room, but it cast long shadows on the dusty floor. And there was a figure in the dim light. Mary's breath shook. Instead of her sister, it was a copy of her. She was see-through, and her edges were fuzzy, making her look like a live memory instead of real flesh and blood. What were once happy, bright eyes now held a sadness from another world. "You came," her sister said in a soft voice that echoed. "I have been waiting." Mary's legs started to feel weak, so she leaned against the wall for support. She was overwhelmed by a rush of feeling, including sadness, love, and disbelief. This isn't real," she said in a shaking whisper. She saw her sister smile, and it was a weak, bittersweet smile. "Mary, it's just as real as your pain. I'm still here because you kept me here." The words hit Mary hard. "What do you mean?" Her voice broke as she asked. "How can I? What should I do?" "Let go," her sister told her as she walked up to her. "Your sadness ties me to this spot. I need you to let me go so I can move on, and you can too." Mary shook her head and shed tears. "But I'll lose you if I let go. Without you, I don't know how to live." Her sister said in a soft voice, "You won't lose me. You'll always remember me in your heart and in the things we did together. Mary, you need to live. Really live. Have fun and make new memories. Being in the light, not the darkness of your sadness, is how you keep me alive." Mary closed her eyes as the words her sister had said hit her hard. She thought about all the nights she had spent remembering the bad times and holding on to the pain as if it were the only thing that linked her to her sister. She opened her eyes slowly and said, "I'll try." The shape of her sister started to fade, and her outline got softer. Even the music started to change. The sad notes turned into lighter, more hopeful ones. Her sister told her, "I'm proud of you. Don't forget that love never ends. It changes all the time." Mary felt calm and warm in her chest as her sister disappeared into the light. It had been months since she had felt this way. The music stopped in the house, but she could still hear it in her mind. It was no longer painful, but it reminded her of the love they had shared. Over the next few days, Mary went back to the quiet street where the house stood a lot. It became a safe place for her to think and feel better, where she could face her pain and turn it into something useful. She began writing about her sister to remember the good times they had together and to share the lessons she had learned from losing her sister. People who were going through their own loss found comfort in her words. The street, which was empty before, seemed to come to life. Other people started to come, drawn by the same unknown force that had drawn Mary there. They left with new hope after carrying their own grief with them in the form of letters, photos, and other mementos. Mary became close to them, telling them stories and giving them the kind of quiet understanding that only someone who had been through a lot of loss could give. The house itself seemed to change over time. Even though it was still worn, it didn't feel like a keepsake from the past. Instead, it felt like a sign of hope for healing. The tune that used to scare Mary turned into a sign of continuity and a warning that love could last beyond life and death. Mary was still on her way, but she was no longer walking by herself. She made friends and shared stories with them, which together formed a fabric of strength and love. As she stood on the quiet street at dawn, the soft notes of her sister's song played over and over in her mind. They were a tune of hope that carried her forward. There was a deep silence in the street, the kind that seemed to carry the breath of stories that had not been told. Mary took her time going through the place. The peeling walls and cracked asphalt made her feel the weight of her memory. Losing her sister was always with her, a pain she carried with her every step, even when she wasn't aware of it. But that street, with its heavy but strangely comfortable air, had become her safe place. Something inside her had started to change in that place of being ignored and left behind. As Mary continues her journey, let me ask you, have you ever faced a moment where you felt torn between holding on to the past and stepping into the unknown? Share your experience in the comment. Your story might inspire someone else navigating a similar path. Her sister used to hum a tune that seemed to echo slightly through the corner, carried by a breeze that whispered through the dead tree branches that lined the road. The music wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was soft and felt more like a feeling than a sound. As Mary walked, it made its way through her mind. She moved in time with the beat, and her sadness and the sounds around her seemed to work together in a quiet way. There was a sense of timelessness about the street. It felt like it was separate from the busy city beyond it. The broken streets, boarded-up homes, and faded graffiti brought back memories of a time long ago. Even though it was falling apart, the place didn't feel dead. It had a soft energy that Mary couldn't quite put her finger on. It was like it had its own memories of happiness, sadness, and hope. Mary went to the street more often because it had a strange pull on her. This was supposed to be a quick fix one night, but it turned into a choice. She found herself drawn to its quiet places, lack of people, and unsaid promise of understanding. She would think about herself as she sat on a bench or leant against a rusty light. The pain in her chest was always there, but this place made it seem softer, like she could almost touch and hold it instead of feeling like it was crushing her. She became aware that she wasn't alone over time. Others walked out into the street. Their faces showed the weight of loss, the same distant pain that Mary knew she felt herself. They walked slowly, as if they didn't know why they were there, but they stayed for a while, sitting on steps or leaning against old fences. The two people were very quiet, almost respectful, and Mary felt like she knew them. They were also looking for something, like solutions, peace, or even the spirits of people they had lost. They didn't go up to Mary at first, and she didn't go up to them. There was an unspoken agreement to share the room and not get in the way of each other's grief. But as the days turned into weeks, small links began to appear. It was a nod of recognition, a quick smile, and a sense of having something in common that brought them together. In Mary's eyes, the street started to look different. What used to feel empty now seemed full of possibility. It felt like the air was lighter and the quiet wasn't as heavy. The soft melody she often heard, the echo of her sister's song, was no longer painful for her. It was now a quiet relief. It seemed like the street was healing with her, turning into a safe place for her and everyone else who came across it. She didn't know it, but Mary started to be kind to people who came to the street in quiet ways. She would put flowers on the steps of the old house and small candles on the streets. Sometimes she would write down her thoughts and hide them in cracks for other people to find. She did it to connect with them and say, "I see you. I get it." The street turned into a place where people shared feelings instead of words. They all admitted to being hurt and how strong they were to handle it. The street looked different each season. People began to leave behind notes, photos, and other items that reminded them of their loved one. Small keepsakes were placed in places that used to be empty, making a tapestry of memories that told many stories. The street turned into a living monument, not to a death, but to love that lived on. It became normal for Mary to go to the street every day. Every time she came, she felt a little better and closer to finally accepting the truth that she had been fighting for so long. Even though her sister was gone, Mary still felt her love. It was a part of who she was. The song in her heart that had been following her around for a long time now seemed like a gift. It helped her remember that sadness wasn't the end, but a way to stay connected to the person she had lost. Mary found herself again in the street's peace and quiet. No longer was she only known for her pain, but also for the strength it had given her and the kindness it had grown in her. The street had changed from a sad spot to a happy one, and Mary, who had felt so lost at first, had become its quiet defender, someone who kept the stories alive and saw the beauty that could come from sadness. As the months went by, Mary's link to the street grew stronger. The way the space changed reflected her own inner journey. A part of her life that had been broken and left behind now had meaning and purpose. Instead of fighting her sadness or letting it take over her, she had learned to sit with it and accept it as part of her story. She opened herself up to the quiet, lasting beauty that often hides in the depths of pain. People from all walks of life came to the street because it turned into a safe place. They didn't come because it was marked or promoted. They came because it seemed to call to them in the same strange, quiet way it had called to Mary. Some people just happened to walk in because they felt a strange sense of calm there. Others came with a plan. They had heard rumors of a place where people could find comfort. No matter what their reason was, they all left behind things that were personal to them, like tokens, letters, photos, and song. What they also took with them were the intangible gifts of hope, understanding, and connection. In time, Mary did more than just watch. She started to be involved in what was going on in the street. She took care of the small garden by pulling weeds and planting flowers that seemed to bloom with strength, just like the people who came to visit. She carefully arranged the gifts people had left behind and started writing in a quiet diary about the stories she had heard or put together from the things people had left behind. It wasn't for other people to read. It was her way of recognizing the lives that had been touched by the street and, by extension, her own. Mary came home one foggy morning to find a new member. A wooden bench was set up under the street's tallest tree. It wasn't fancy or anything, but the way it was placed made me think it was meant to be there, encouraging people to stop and think. One word, remember, was carved into the cushion. As soon as people came to the street, the bench became the center of attention. People were always sitting there quietly, lost in thought, or in small groups, talking quietly to each other. Many times, Mary sat there by herself, feeling her sister's weight on her more than ever. The bench seemed to embody everything that the street had come to stand for, a spot where memories could be kept, loved, and shared without worrying that they would be forgotten. This made Mary think about her trip. The rhythm of her sister's song, which used to hurt her because it reminded her of her loss, had become a steadying force in her life. It still came up in her mind out of the blue, but it didn't make her cry anymore. Instead, it made her feel warm and strong, like her sister's love had never really left. The song had become a sign of her strength, a link between her past and present that led her to the future. Mary started to see herself in the people who came to visit as she got used to being the unofficial guardian of the street. The young woman put a flower that had been pressed between the leaves of an old book. The old man stared at the picture in his hands for hours, and the child carefully set down a toy car on the steps of the old house. Each of them had their own story and loss, and Mary could see parts of her own pain in theirs. Not having to say much was often enough. Her presence, her soft smile, and her quiet understanding. The street moved on its own. Small candles were left on the streets by people, and their flickering flames made a path of light through the dark. The yard got lush and colorful, and the flowers seemed to bloom no matter what time of year it was. Even the old, worn-out house didn't look as empty. Its paint was still chipped and its windows were broken, but it had a warm feeling about it, as if it had soaked up the love and healing that had grown there. Over the course of one evening, Mary sat on the bench next to the tree as the sun went down and turned the sky a golden tone. The only sound on the street was the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. She took out her notebook and ran her fingers over the worn cover. Then she turned to a blank page. She became aware of how much she had changed since her first cautious steps down this path as she began to write. Her sadness hadn't gone away. It never would, but it had become less intense so she could handle it without fear. It had become a part of her, not as a hardship but as proof of how much she loved him. Mary smiled as the tune of her sister's song played in her head. She knew that the song wasn't a way to relive her pain, but rather a way to remember to respect it. It was a link between her and the people who came to the street, the memories they shared, and the love that held them all together. Mary felt very peaceful as she watched the lights flicker as night fell. Like her heart, the street had changed into a place of hope where love and loss lived together peacefully. Mary escaped the shadows of her past. But have you ever wondered what happens when the darkness refuses to let you go? In the next video, uncover a terror so real it might be closer than you think. Click if you dare.